You have joined us for a webinar on Infor compensation management. Two wonderful presenters here today. I want to introduce Jana Hartstock, doing her webinar debut at RPI. Very excited, former presenter in Forum, and Jackie Dudas, who many of you probably know already. Please give them a warm welcome.
Thank you, Keith. So as Keith mentioned, we're going to be talking about compensation management in global HR. Feel free to ask questions. I think they're going to post questions as they come in, and we can stop it at a time that it seems appropriate and answer your questions. If we can't get you an answer right away, we'll research it and get back to you as soon as possible. Absolutely. So just a little bit about us. RPI has been around since 1999. We are an Infor Alliance partner specializing in Cloud Suite. And we have consultants all over the United States, nationwide, that specialize in all sorts of Lawson Infor products. Here is our agenda for the day. We're going to pretend we're at the pool so we can float on this flamingo float right here. This is what we're going to go over. Compensation overview first, then talk about who can access compensation and what roles are delivered. Then we're going to go through some of the compensation components, a few implementation considerations. Jana's going to take us into a deep dive into merit budgets off the deep end, and then we're going to hit some questions a little bit later on if you guys can come up with anything. Nothing too difficult though, okay?
It's early.
So what is compensation management? Compensation management is part of the integrated components of talent management. So you have part of talent management is global HR, so that's your base component, information, setup, structure, and then on top of that you have some additional modules. Compensation management is one of those modules, and it helps you maintain your pay information, your structures. It helps you to give out merit bonuses and awarding as well. So it's basically everything that you need that surrounds pay information within global HR. And at the bottom of that slide said GHR structure is a prerequisite. So you do need to have global HR implemented prior to using compensation management, but you can implement them at the same time. So these are the components of compensation management. Hopefully you can read this from your view. First, you have base pay administration. So this is the space that you can access to set up and maintain your salary structures, your step and grade schedules, anything that you need to set up around pay types. You can also actually do pay changes here as well as mass pay changes as well. Down below we have incentive compensation, where you would set up and maintain your schedules and the formulas, the rules around when you move from one schedule to another. Over on Jana's top side, compensation management, this is where you can create and administer your merit and your bonus and award programs. And then lastly, over on the corner, you have your market salary survey. So you can use this to compare what you as an organization are paying your employees to what other organizations are paying.
Absolutely.
Compensation management terminology. So just a couple quick terms here that we might throw out throughout this presentation. First one is enrollment. Enrollment, very easy term, but I wanted to call it out because at least for me, I never really thought of you being able to enroll someone into a compensation program. But just like you can enroll someone into a benefits or absence plan, you can set up criteria that makes people go into or out of compensation plans. It's a little bit quick automation so that you don't really have to kind of go through and figure out, well, who's in this department, who's in this process level, and who needs, who's been here for 10 years and who needs, an award at this point. So you can have people fall into and out of custom groups, which are like employee groups. It's kind of the S3 employee group equivalent. Another word for these is also eligibility groups. So eligibility groups are set up with certain eligibility parameters where people can move into or out of them based on how their information changes, or if they accrue certain tenure or have been around for a longer time, they might fall into a certain custom group that you have set up. And then a compensation schedule, not to be confused with like a step and grade schedule or salary structure. This is actually a customizable calendar that you can use to maintain your pay dates and performance periods. So if you want to review someone over a certain performance period to maybe give them an award or a bonus, you can set that up right within the compensation module. So who accesses compensation management? We have 5 delivered roles here. So there are multiple or more roles that you could make that you could customize if you need to, but these are 5 delivered roles from Infor. The first one is the administrator. this is like your God role. So this is what where you can go to set up everything that you would need to set up, your prerequisites, your structures, all that information. The administrator also has processing access. So if for some reason they need to go in and process something, they do have the capability to do pay changes, awarding, all that good stuff. Your compensation analyst, this is like your compensation workhorse. So this is someone who's going to be actually probably more than likely going to be going in and processing the changes. They can create almost as much as the administrator can, like the custom groups, planning rules. They can create approval workflows as well, calculate budgets, but not quite as much setup access as your administrator. Next is your HR generalist. This is kind of like an administrator light. They have almost as much set up again as the administrator, but they can also set up your market survey provider templates, set up other reports as well. And if they need to, they also have access to run that processing too. Manager employees, these are kind of like your end users for compensation management. So a manager can go in, they can own a budget. So if I'm a manager and I might have people reporting to me and I have a budget associated with those positions, I can own that budget and figure out not only, budget by FTE, but figure out how much I can actually pay each person. And if I'm running out of my budget or if I have excess, I can maybe fill that out a little bit more. And then employee, an employee can log in and see their basic information about what pay they're receiving for each of their work assignments. They can update their profile, also not exactly in compensation, but they can also apply for internal jobs. They can add dependents, all sorts of good things as an employee. I do want to mention though that this is not exactly where an employee logs in to check their pay stub, because payroll is not yet on Global HR or in Global HR. The pay stub information is still initiating from S3. So to view that information, you're going to have to kind of send the employee back to their employee self-service area, but usually organizations can pretty easily, seamlessly do that with just a single sign-on click through. They are in employee space, they click through to their employee self-service, don't know the difference, and then just jump back into employee space to do the rest of their setup.
Because there's links, right, in employee space to take you to pay.
Yep.
In S3.
Exactly. All right, administrator. This is the next few slides. We're going to just click through a couple views of the process boards for each of the roles that we went over. Feel free to jump in if you have anything else too.
No.
Administrator, so when, just like any other module within Global HR, compensation is role-based. So like we said before, you have your administrator. When the administrator logs in, there's actually like a button. I don't think I have a picture of it in here, but there's like a button that says administrator. That person clicks here and they have access to all these great things right here. I've actually hovered right over compensation here, and you can see there's a lot of options for me to select. You can see they have the setup setup would actually be farther down, but they can go into incentive compensation, awarding. They have access to jobs and positions. So if you were maintaining pay rates on your jobs or positions, you would be able to do that there, or just check out what jobs and positions are in the system. Also reportings, and there's a to-do list at the bottom there. So as the administrator, you might not really have a to-do, but I believe the compensation analyst and the HR generalist have a to-do list that's kind of, helps them walk through their day, and they're able to access anything that gets sent to them for approval through their to-do list as well. Next, here's the compensation analyst process board. So I didn't open up any of these selections, but you can see just across the top, incentive compensation, awarding, resource analysis, and pay rate processing. Here we go. I think I opened up setup here. So this is where you would go in and actually go ahead and create some of your custom groups. Again, custom groups are like your employee groups. You create them and then you tie them to a certain business class or a table. And then, we would create these custom groups and then tie them to the compensation business class so that you're able to access them within compensation management. Lots more goodies in here, step and grade schedule, salary structures, a lot of stuff you can set up as the compensation analyst. All right, HR generalist, almost through our roles here. This is, again, a little snippet of the process board. Clicked on the compensation button for the HR generalist. You can see they have other stuff like performance goals, other stuff going on here, but this is their compensation button. And then again, just like the administrator, they have a whole bunch of items to select from right here. For this one, I clicked on pay rate processing, and I chose to change pay rates. This is a mass pay change. You have effective dates up here. If you're on Global HR, you know that everything is effective date driven. Do we have a question? No? Okay. Everything is effective date driven, so you got to be really careful with your effective dates. Update option, this one's pretty cool. This you have the two options to model your changes or to actually update the work assignment. Modeling your changes is like running something in non-update for S3. So good way to check it out before you actually process it. You can do a percent or amount. You can do a whole new pay rate. Pick your rounding method. And then down at the bottom, you can use resource criteria to pick who you want to be affected by this change. So we have an eligibility group option right here. We could do it by job. We could do it by position. We could do it by employee ID range. Get my employee number in there in the beginning and the end. Just update that. And then job, organization unit, all sorts of criteria here that you have to be able to update somebody's pay rate, or many people's pay rates at one time. All right, into manager. This is again the manager process board right here. I've clicked adjust compensation, and I have all of these options for by which I can adjust someone's compensation. For this one, I've clicked budget analysis. So this is me in as a manager. I don't have any reports showing down here, but this view is my budget roll up for me as a manager. So down here would have the name of my budget, the role, the beginning and remaining amount for my budget, equity units budgeted if you're providing equity to employees, salaries, awards, all of this rolled right up into a quick view. And then for most lists within the system, you can click options CSV and quickly export anything to CSV. So it's a really quick way to get a good analysis of your budget.
And just a note about this view, this is from the applet or the kind of back end view of it. So those of you that have manager space and are wondering kind of where these icons are, it's a little bit different depending on how you've customized your manager space homepage. And the navigation's more across the top for getting to these items. And we'll, a little bit later, we'll have a example of a budget with some people in it so you can see more how it would look to your managers.
Yeah, very good point. A lot of these screenshots, at least in the first half of the presentation, are from the applet or the rich client. I think Jana has some later that are from the web UI. But if you're in Global HR, you should already know that you can change your color and your background. So even if they look a little bit different, they might still be the same place. But if you have any questions or confusion around where we actually are, just let us know. And lastly, here we have the employee view. So this is me as an employee. I've assigned myself 2 work assignments here, so you can see the different FTE pay rate and then total pay rate for each of my work assignments. If we had plugged in the target variable compensation, this would appear here, as well as the historical values for that. And then also if you were doing equity grants, those would appear here as well. But this is just a quick snapshot of me as an employee, what I see when I look at my compensation. All right, so into base pay administration. We talked about this a little bit before, but this is what you would be looking at if you're just doing your base pay administration. You're not creating any awards, you're not doing bonuses through Global HR. This is what you need to just go live and maintain base pay. So salary structures, probably, you can set those up quartile or quintile. You can also set up geographical differentials, though you don't need to if you're not using that. And then step and grade schedules, maybe you're using one or the other, maybe you're using both of them. And you can also specify different progression rules. So if it's by time or by hours worked, you can set that up as well. The rules, guidelines, and validations, that has to do with your different groups, not only custom groups, but your step and grade progression rules too. And then again, your job and position information. So a lot of this information might go onto your jobs and positions, like you might put your salary structures on your position. Maybe you're tracking pay rates at the position level that you want to override. So you definitely need access to that as well. All right, salary structure, step and grade schedules. This is a screenshot of a salary structure. So we have different, actually we only have one iteration of this, I think, but these are the different grades within the structure. And then we don't have any resources assigned, but one of the really neat things about GHR is that in a lot of places it shows you resources assigned to whatever you're looking at. So if you wanted to quickly know who was in the structure, you could find that down here. And again, options, export to CSV, quick reporting. And then here's the zones that we have within the structure. You have the ability to set up, I think, as many zones as you want. We have 3 here, min, mid, max. And then if you have 5, I think only 5 show up on the work assignment, or only 5 of them show up on the work assignment. So you're not going to see all of them, although they are built into the structure. And resource analysis here. So this is a list of all of our resources that we have in our test system. And it's showing you their pay rate right here, compa ratio percents over here. It's also showing their supervisor. So if you wanted to know who they were reporting to or review this, this is from the compensation analyst view, this list of reporting, but the generalist and the administrator can also access this as well. Again, quick way to get a report, you can use your search box up here, put in different parameters, maybe filter by organization unit, you only want people from a certain department, and you can export it right from here. Sorry, Jan, I thought you had some slides coming.
They're coming.
Incentive compensation. So this is something that this screenshot here is the compensation analyst process board, and we clicked incentive compensation, and this can be tied to the performance and goal module. So if you want to incentivize employees to get a good performance review, you can tie this module right in, or if they hit certain goals, or if they exceed certain goals, you can provide incentive compensation to kind of reward them for achieving that information, or that achievement.
This would also, if you have a sales organization, this is where you would set up all their sales goals for the year, and you can also tie in external results through the goal module to give you those parameters.
All right, awarding process. So focal awards, anniversary awards, all of this can be set up here. Compensation awards as well, and much like any other action or anything that's submitted through Global HR, there's an approval process for it. Delivered is 3 approval levels. I forget who it goes to first, but you do have 3 approval levels delivered. You can modify that through flows. And as that's sent through the process, it probably goes up to the manager, director, and then maybe the compensation administrator. Any of those people can approve it or reject it, and they can put in comments that would go back down the line to let someone know why it's been approved or rejected. It's all you.
So there are also delivered actions that come through the compensation modules, things like approving salary awards, approving focal awards, changing the pay rate, as we mentioned earlier. You can change pay in kind of a mass function with the position, or you can do individual business objectives that are completed when a resource completes the objectives for a particular bonus period or requests a payout. There's also the ability to request a new job, and that ties in somewhat to talent acquisition, requesting a special incentive for your employee, and you can obviously modify that for your particular organization's incentive program. And then there's a process for all the awards that are based on these actions. Each action has its own workflow that can be modified to exactly match your specific organization's process. And you can finalize them on once they've done however many approval levels you want and make them available to the managers. And the managers can approve or reject or reverse these types of awards.
And just one thing to look out for, depending on what action you're doing, it may or may not go down to S3. So for example, request special incentive at the client I'm working on right now, that one doesn't go down to S3, so we had to kind of build in a notification to send to payroll to let them know, hey, you have to do this special payout. Their pay rate isn't changing, but we're doing this 3-month special incentive increase. So it's like a lump sum that they do. Pay rate changes will go down to S3 or whoever your payroll provider is, but just want to keep that in mind in case there's some that aren't showing up down in S3. Okay, so bonus awards. There's 3 ways that you can, or not 3, many ways that you can set up. We have 4 listed here. There's even more than this. There's listed as flat percent of salary. You can do a percent of your salary. You can set up ratios based on your performance reviews or goals that an employee has hit, and then generic annual, monthly, quarterly, etc., etc. All right, pay rate processing. So we touched on this a little bit before. I think we were in the HR generalist where we went in and started to do a mass pay rate change. But under pay rate processing, I think this is the generalist board. If not, the administrator and the comp analyst also has access to this. You can go in and do mass pay rate, set up allowances, rate progression. but you would be updating a pay rate change to a work assignment for an employee. So a work assignment, for those of you who aren't in global HR right now, a work assignment is kind of like your PA-13 equivalent. It's where you connect your position to your employee. So you want to update it right on that information. It's not stored on the employee itself, it's stored at the work assignment level. All right, compensation reporting. So the first item we have here is creating reports from lists. This is the one that I've been harping on when you go to options and push to CSV. That's the create your reports from lists. So that one is super helpful. It goes right out into a CSV, and then you can save that as an Excel file and manipulate it outside the system, or you can use some of the parameters in searching inside the system to get that to dump out pretty cleanly.
And you can almost add almost any field that you need into that list. So there's additional considerations you need to have as you're looking at your data. You can drop those fields in before you export.
Yeah. And that's done by personalization,
Yep.
right? Which not everybody allows their employees to do personalization. Generally, your administrator might have a personalization or configuration access, and then after we've kind of like settled on, yes, that's what we want the report to look like, you can create that as a configuration and push it out globally.
Especially if you have a group of comp analysts. If you're a larger organization,
really know what they're doing.
You
Yep.
can modify the view through configuration console and just push it out to them.
Yeah, exactly. You also have market survey reports. This is where you would go in and build the templates that your organization needs to report on for market survey. Same thing with regulatory reporting. You would go in here and create these templates. And then you have a lot of options on how you can create the templates, whether it's by org unit, supervisor, salary structure, all sorts of different, you can include jobs, positions, all sorts of different parameters for actually creating those reports. All right, couple implementation considerations. So first of all, you can use global HR without fully deploying the compensation module. You'll probably use it a little bit, at least for salary structures, step and grade schedules, pay rate changes. I mean, that happens within the compensation module, but you don't need to set up everything else in order to go live with GHR. You can kind of take that on little by little, work on your incentive compensation later, your merit increases later. Just set up that main stuff that you need, those main structures that you need. And then these are just some things that you should ask yourself if you're the comp administrator, or maybe your organization, as you're considering going live with global HR and or compensation management. But do you administer merit increases? And is that something that you want to do within global HR?
And how many of you are still doing them in spreadsheets?
Yeah, yeah.
We should have had a poll for people to respond
we should have
to.
had that. I bet it's 90%.
Yeah.
Do you administer promotions within salary awarding? And then when do you administer salary planning? Is it the same time every year, or does it go by an employee's adjusted hire date, or is it throughout the year? Do you want to maintain validation criteria to restrict managers from exceeding their total budget, or do you want that to just, they can go above, not a big problem, or do you want to actually lock them down to really not be able to exceed their budget? Are you planning on implementing performance and goal? And if so, do you want to use the compensation module to incentivize employees for when they hit performance reviews or goals in a good way? You want to give them an incentive to actually hit those milestones. And along with that, if you are planning to do performance and goals, in which order do you want to do them? Do you want to start the incentive processing first and then kind of marry that in with performance and goals, or do you want to get performance and goals up running first and then figure out how to do that incentive compensation afterwards? So just something to think about. And then lastly here, do you perform market evaluations and send any data to a provider? If so, you're going to want to get those templates and get them into the system so you can easily export exactly what they need and send it to them.
As well as import when the surveys come back, so that you have the most current market pricing data
Very true.
in your system. Great. Okay, so we thought it would be helpful to take you on a deeper dive of actually setting up a merit budget, since most people have been using spreadsheets forever and ever, and we wanted to show you exactly how you could set up the system to manage your process through it. There's kind of 5 main parts to setting up a merit budget. There's your custom groups that Jackie mentioned earlier that are critical to defining certain populations. There's the planning rule that you set up, and we'll see there's a lot of flexibility in the planning rule as to what you use to define that. There's an awarding view that will help you get the look and feel for change management purposes to very closely mimic the spreadsheets everybody's used to using. And then we're going to show you a couple special add-ins you could do, some examples through Configuration Console that would help get it to the exact process that you're looking for. And then there's some process flows involved as well that, as we mentioned before, you can modify to exactly match your approval process. Custom groups, there's kind of three main areas you want to think about with the custom groups. You have groups that define your eligibility for the merit budget. You have groups that give the guidelines for the range for the percent increase and can give you warning and error messages around that. And then you have groups that you design to validate against those guidelines. So a couple of things to consider when you're defining your custom groups. If you could.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. For your main eligibility group, thinking through things like, is everybody eligible for a merit increase, or do you have to have been hired by a certain date to be eligible for this year's current merit increase? Are all your employees full-time and part-time eligible, or only full-time, or some other variation of a work type? Obviously, you want people who are active, but you need to have that in the group, that their work assignment's active, their relationship status is active. Maybe you've got a division in your company that's not participating, that does their merit increases differently than what the main part of the organization is doing. If so, then you would want to exclude those specifically in that custom group so budgets aren't generated for that division. And then thinking through, are executives included or excluded? Do they have a different process? And so is there a job level or a position level that you can add into your criteria to make sure you're getting the right group that are eligible for this particular merit increase? And a note with the custom group, preview is your friend. If you click on the preview, it'll generate an exact list of who that definition includes, and you can go through that and make sure you're seeing everybody you wanted to see and that you're not seeing people that shouldn't be, that aren't eligible for this particular merit.
Sometimes it's your enemy too, though.
Yeah.
If you think you have it and you're so close and you hit preview and nobody shows up,
Yeah.
but it is your friend.
Yeah, yeah. Guideline groups, these are groups where you can get into, if you're prorating. Now we'll see in a minute there is some proration functionality, but if you have multiple proration periods, then you're going to have to include that in these custom groups. So maybe you've got people hired to a certain point get 75% of this year's merit, and then hired between some other dates get 50% of the merit. Are you looking at your market pricing, or as Jackie was mentioning earlier with the salary structures, are you looking at a mid, or max? Is that a consideration for who's eligible for your merit? Again, full-time or part-time, have to include that. If they're active, you want to include definitions around that as well, so your guideline groups aren't pulling in people who aren't eligible. And are you going to be using an overall rating from a performance appraisal, for example, to pull in and have some impact as to what percent increase is recommended for that individual? A note about the overall rating is performance appraisals do need to be fully approved for that performance appraisal overall rating to pull in fully to the merit budget. So if you've got kind of a messier overlap of some people are finishing up appraisals and you're not quite 100% approved, there is an ability to upload that overall rating into the merit budgets once the budget has been created. But that can be a gotcha. Sometimes people don't realize, ooh, I had to have my appraisals all the way here for this to work automatically. So looking at the planning rules, there's a number of tabs as you're seeing on this screen. And the first one is the options. And this is where you're going to go in and you're going to identify the rounding method as well as what you want to round to. If you're using a rating scale, you'll pull in that rating scale. And then there's several options there that will display or not display other tabs on the planning rules depending on whether or not you select it. So if you're going to allow lump sum payments, that would be an additional tab that'll show up. We'll show you a screenshot in a minute. But if you're not using lump sum, some organizations in the contracting world, for example, somebody's base pay might already be at the max that that contract would allow. And so instead of increasing that base pay and having part of their salary no longer be reimbursable by the contract, they would use a lump sum to reward that employee for their performance for that year without adjusting their base pay. Approval process, whether or not that's required. You can just have the budgets approved and go straight to the comp analyst. Or if you want it to go up through 1, 2, 3 levels of approval, you can select that approval process required checkbox. Awarding from multiple rules. If you would like to layer in on top of a merit, maybe there's a bonus or some other awarding process that you would like to layer in, you have that ability. And then if the employee is transferred from one manager to another during the merit planning process, do you want their budget's amount to transfer as well? And usually that's checked on. And then there's an additional section for equity awards if that's going to be part of the process as well. Next tab is where you would add in your budget calculations. This is where you will define who gets what. You've got several calculation options there. You've got the ability to calculate off of the percent of a base salary, percent of a salary range, use the merit process to adjust to some salary range minimum to get people up to a minimum. If you want to put in a flat rate that every manager just gets $2,500 to work with and that's all they have, you can do that. You can also do a zero budget if it's a year like 2008 and you've got people who are going through the process but you can't give a budget to them right now, and then you can make that editable or not by the manager, but it would default in as a zero budget. And just a note, the 0% of base salary would be, for example, if your organization says, okay, 3% of salaries is what we're using this year for your merit budgets, then you would put that percent in there. And then you do have some proration options in here. There's a couple options in terms of the method, if you want to look at days or months. And then you can define the nearest point to those days or months. Nearest point, I'm sorry, is used with the months mostly. And then you can also look at the last kind of transaction in an employee's work assignment. So maybe they had a promotion mid-year, and that makes them ineligible for the merit increase because that promotion took into account the merit that they would also be getting. It bumped them up for the year. You can define by your action codes what the system should look at to know if somebody's eligible or not for that particular merit budget. And then you can also look at work assignments created between dates, and that can help you capture some of your newer hires if they're going to be prorated. But as you see, there's only one option for that. So as I mentioned before, if you have multiple proration definitions, then you'd want to work with your custom groups to do that. The next tab is your guidelines tab. This is where you're going to start pulling in those custom groups. You are establishing a range that's acceptable for the merit increase, and that's going to be based on the eligibility group that they're in, or it could be based on a performance rating, flat across the board. You could do the combination of a performance rating and where they are in their compo ratio, as well as the performance rating and where their position is in the range that's been defined earlier. So it's pretty flexible based on how you want to do it. And then just kind of a sample screen of the validation rules. This is what the system is comparing to give you messages and warnings around the percents that the managers are putting into the merit budgets. So this one has some examples of different prorations, 75, 50, 100%, and the end of it, that 25, 50, 75, this organization was using market pricing data in terms of the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentiles to define where people were eligible for merit increases. The approval rules, you can put in a custom group to define the eligibility for the managers that approve. This tab won't show up at all if you don't check that box earlier on that options tab. So some organizations don't have outside approval processes and don't need to use this, but this is available, and then it gives you some flexibility that you only want it to go through approval if the percent that the manager is trying to award is above the guidelines, or perhaps the percent is above a certain threshold and you can define that threshold, or is their salary above the salary range. It's dynamic based on your definition and your process. Lump sum payment is, again, this tab only shows up if you select lump sum at the beginning. And as I mentioned before, if somebody's gotten too expensive for a particular contract or is right at the max of their salary range and you still want to reward their performance for the year but don't want to start creating kind of detrimental or adverse impacts with your salaries, you can use the lump sum option to reward that person for their performance. And finally, the awarding display. So this is where you're going to start connecting to an awarding view. The system kind of defines it in tandem with the planning rule. And then we're going to go next and see where you can further define. So your awarding view is where you have your planning rule pull in, you connect to it, you define your awarding period, you define additional awarding rules, and finally your awarding display. And just like a custom pool there, it kind of lets you define the look and feel to get as close to those spreadsheets that everybody's used to looking at. But gives you so much more power having it in the system. So your planning rules is where you're going to link in if there's a rating scale involved. You'll link that in along with the planning rule. And as you can see on the screen, there are multiple planning rules that are allowed. So you can say which one is processed first, which one's processed second, if there's a bonus involved, and any kind of equity awards in the mix as well. The awarding period allows you to define if it's a focal period, which just means everybody's done at once during a certain time frame, or an anniversary based, which would be throughout the year as employees are hitting their anniversaries. Then budgets would be created. The start and end date to note, this is the date that these budgets are accessible in manager space. So there's not going to be, you have to make sure you leave those open for as long as you want managers in the system. Otherwise it disappears and you get lots of calls. Where'd my budget go? The awarding rules tab lets you connect to your salary planning rule, and the proration adjustment, as we mentioned earlier, you can pull that in here, and you can also connect to your lump sum rule if you're using that. And then finally, the awarding display. And if you kind of squint your eyes and look in closely at your screen, you'll see there's a ton of options here where you can define what you want to show and whether it's editable or not by the manager. There's a little bit of this back on the planning rule, but this is where you'll get it closer and closer to those old spreadsheets that everybody's used to. But really to give them all the pieces of information that they need to make the right decision in terms of what they would like to give. And then if you really want to super customize your pool and have the spillover spa and the swim up bar, there's a couple of things. We wanted to give you a couple ideas of things that you could do through Configuration Console. So the first one, if you take a peek, is a field that was customized to require comments when the % increase was outside of the guidelines. And this forces the manager, we'll see in a few slides, a little red warning exclamation point, and brings it to their attention, but also forces them to put stuff in so that you have that for your approvers on the back end to look at. So, and here's kind of an example of how it would look. The top screen is in Configuration Console where you would go to add that field in to that list definition that we talked about, and the bottom screen is what it actually looks like to a manager. So you can see performance rating has been pulled in, the type of pay that they have, the salary they currently have in their FTE, so that if there's some discrepancy between similar people, you realize, oh, well, this person's only 80% pay rates current, and then some of these are editable, so they could put either the new pay rate in, or they could put in a % increase, or they could put in just a total salary amount that they want to increase. And you can see in the middle there the guideline % that is based on the rules that you've created. That will tell you what the recommended guideline % is. And then here on the right is these exclamation points. So these people have been given % increases that are outside of the guideline %, and it's telling them, hey, you're doing something, and if you hover over it, we'll see in the next screen, you can modify, you can modify there we go, thank you, the hover text even to give your managers additional instructions right on screen there and say, you know what, this award's outside of the guideline % here, and a comment really is required. So that's something that you can add in if you know somebody that knows LPL, or somebody here at RPI can add that in for you. If you could go back to just the screen before. Oh, the comp analyst view, you can similarly, as we mentioned before, kind of configure that to exactly mimic what the manager is looking at. So depending on if the managers call your comp analyst directly, or you've got a group, a service center group, and you want to make it as simple as possible for them to interact with the managers and understand what the manager's looking for. Through Configuration Console, you can modify this on a global basis and push that out to your users. So there's a few ideas, a few tips and tricks, hopefully. Coming up, just to let everybody know, RPI will be attending the Southeast Lawson User Group mega meeting. And on the Wednesday following, we're going to be doing an IPA Symposium. So hope that you will all come out and attend.
Yeah. Keith might have some more information on that,
absolutely.
or we might have some questions, or...
Yeah, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
You know, as far as the IPA Symposium, again, you can go to our website, look up information there. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're very excited about the event. There'll be an agenda coming out soon, and you can get some more information on that. We do have a couple questions here. I'll start with, if we're moving to global HR but do not own the compensation module, is there a place within global HR to maintain jobs, positions, step, and grade schedules in the meantime?
Yeah, jobs and positions are part of core HR, and the step and grade schedules are as well. So Jackie they're critical to defining for if you're going to put compensation management up and running.
I also think that if you own global HR, you do own compensation management.
Yeah.
I think it comes with it. It might just not be called out. But double check.
Yeah.
I think if you own talent management, you own the compensation module as well.
So there's actually sort of been a change for a while. Lawson and Infor sold those separately, and I don't know if now they don't. So you know, don't take our official word for here. You got to check with your
Infor
reps. And
Sorry.
so and this is obviously they're asking if we have any suggestions on or recommendations on vendors to use for market survey data. I don't know if that's something that we dive into at all. No.
That really varies depending on the industry that you're in.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's some major market survey players out there that you can go to, but depending on the industry, and you might have to participate in a private survey locally to really get the right data for that particular market and that particular function.
Right, especially in things like healthcare, there's going to be a lot of regional differences.
Yeah.
And one last question here. Have you experienced rounding issues in the merit module?
Yes, so you will find with your hourly staff as opposed to your salaried staff, there's less wiggle room with those hourly rates. The system only rounds to 2 decimal points. So you may find some of your hourly staff, if you have really tight guideline constraints around a merit budget, they're going to show errors, and there's really nothing you can do. The system has rounded up their rate to the closest percent. They're never going to be exactly 3% or 2.5. It's going to be like 2.671 or something like that. So that is kind of a known issue with the merit budgets that we've experienced.
All right, well, that's all the questions we have for today. If you come up with any later, please go ahead and send them to Jackie and Jana. Their emails are here. We're always happy to engage. Thank you, Jana, Jackie. This was a great presentation. Great way to kick off our Summer Sizzler week of webinars.